Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. It is May 11th. This is the Kops office hours. We have a couple of items on the agenda. Please feel free to add your agenda items so we can be sure to get to them, and your names in the attendee section. Otherwise, I guess we should just jump right into it. I wanted to give everyone a quick update. Last week was KubeCon in KubeCon EU in Copenhagen. I think it went great. It was great to see everyone, or some people there, and lots of interest in Kubernetes, of course, and in Kops, and lots of interest in, I think, what we're working on being the right things in terms of, etcd adoption, add-on management. Those seem to be the two hot button topics. So in general, I think, and more clouds, and I think. Those are the sort of things which we know we should be working on, and the feedback I think we got was generally positive that those are the things that are important to people. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to add about KubeCon, but bigger and bigger every year. I know it seems like I haven't been to a KubeCon EU before, but I think it was about the same size as KubeCon US was, I guess, about a year ago. So not the most recent one, but previously. And so they just keep getting bigger and bigger, and it's awesome to see the community. The next thing on the agenda was I wanted to give an update on 110. As in case for people that don't know, we're trying to get the etcd upgrades working from etcd 2 to etcd 3. The goal is to get that as an opt-in in Kops 110. That is going well. The last big thing is the adoption of existing volumes, so I think I have it at least on my hack testing working, where you can switch between etcd versions and upgrade from etcd 2 to etcd 3. If you're using the manager, you can opt into the manager. The missing pieces right now are if you were not using the manager, if you have an existing cluster and you start using the manager, we need to adopt that data. That's obviously pretty important. And that just needs, either we can restore from a backup, or we can try to mount the same volumes and move the data. I'm going to look at doing the latter because it's a little bit more reliable. There is one challenge, which is we were talking about switching to etcd v3 by default for new clusters. The problem is I don't think we can do that because we would have to set an etcd version of, let's say, 3.2, right, in the spec. And then the problem is when going forwards, we don't know whether you actually want to stay on 3.2 or whether you want to use the latest version. I don't know if anyone has any clever ideas on how to fix this, but otherwise, I think what I'll do is I'll make it much easier to specify the etcd version. I'll do a PR to make it much easier to specify the etcd version on a new cluster. And we'll document that and say, if you're doing a new cluster, specify it. And then we can switch the default when we actually make the etcd manager the default. And we can also, and I think we can also default it if you're using the etcd manager. I think we can default to etcd 3, but I'm not entirely sure we're going to be able to do the creation of new clusters defaulting to etcd 3 if you are not using etcd manager. But we'll see. I need to play around with that. So hopefully this weekend, address the PR backlog. There are some great PRs in there. I can see one of them highlighted in next up, and then cut the 110 alpha. We don't have to obviously get all the PRs in there to the alpha, but I'd like to at least get the bulk of them in there. And I made some good progress on them yesterday, and hopefully more today, tomorrow, on Sunday. Andrew, you have a piece on Alibaba Cloud Networking. Or an item on it.
I think Shane is on the call too, and I think he works for Alibaba Cloud. Essentially, my concern is more so around how we want to approve these PRs. So I don't think anyone on the owners list is an expert in using Alibaba Cloud. But I mean, looking at the code, the code seems fine. There's nothing in there that would break any other functionalities in Kops. So is the mentality going forward going to be, if the code looks good, it's not breaking anything up for other clouds, let's just ship it, and then whoever owns the code for Alibaba Cloud can eventually fix it up later.
Yes, I think that's a very accurate summary, and obviously it would be great to have like people from Alibaba into the owners file to be like the relevant reviewers as more people contribute to that. But yes, I mean, I think like when I look at them, I look for is it going to break other clouds? And like obviously people that are contributing new clouds might not be as familiar with Kops in general, and so like are there tricks? Are there like is the PR falling into one of the pitfalls? That sort of thing. But yes, the one thing we could do is, I don't know, Shane, if you want to consider creating I don't know if it's currently feature flagged Alibaba or not, but having a feature flag, so GCE is still feature flagged. And what that means is that technically we can make breaking changes to it. Obviously we don't like to, but we can do that. And so it may be handy to have a feature flag just so that you can feel very comfortable making changes in future, but that doesn't really impact. Yes, in answer to your question, the PR, if code looks good, isn't breaking other clouds, let's get it in there. Yeah, I was gonna look through it and then I ran out of time. So, but yes, that would be the standard I would also apply.
Okay, I can take a look at it after.
Sweet, thank you. Mike.
Yeah, I just threw this on there just as a talking point. It kind of relates to what you were just saying, Justin, about 110. And depending on how far out the alpha is it worth considering a 191 for a bunch of the stuff we talked about last time? Because I brought up at our last meeting, kubedns. There was a big issue that I've patched on our clusters manually, but I have to repatch it all the time.
Yep. Sorry, that's my bad. We should definitely.
No, it's all good.
We should definitely do that and do 191. And I don't know if there's anything else that goes in there, but yeah, certainly the DNS one is worthy. And I don't recall any PRs that were like warranted going into a .1 release. There's certainly like I think there's a PR for a new version of Calico, but my inclination would be that it's a new major version, and so it should go into Kops 110 rather than going into 191. It would be surprising for people to get that update. And we have like the add-on work, which I'm actually working on right now, should allow us to get away from having to do versions of Kops for this purpose. I don't know, that would make me happy.
Yeah, Justin, I'm really interested in the add-on work. So if you have any issues or like small tasks that you can hand over to me, that'd be great.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think let me tell you the sort of approach that I'm looking at. So it's not even really my approach, but Brian Grant did something called declarative application management. I think that's what it's called. But the idea is that basically using the Kubernetes API to effectively overlay or patch existing manifests. So it's sort of like you install the Kops one and then you kubectl apply or kubectl patch your thing on top. And it's nice because it doesn't introduce a second templating language. And there is a tool called Kustomize with a K, formerly called Kinflate. It is in github.com Kubernetes kubectl, which is a little confusing, but it's in kubectl. I think the plan is it will eventually be part of kubectl. And there's a good demo if you go into like command Kustomize, which shows like how it works and the layers. And the idea that I'm playing with is trying to get it so that we can have one of those patch layers or a customization patch, which we sort of store alongside the cluster. And that would allow you to change, I guess in theory, it would certainly allow you to change resource limits, or like the canonical example. You could change the image. It's not the best idea, and we're going to try to make it more. Thanks, Seth. Yeah, that looks like it. We're going to try to figure out how to get it so that, in this case, kubedns would publish their own base customization resources, and we would reference them, which would be a little easier. So yeah, that's sort of, I'm trying to get that like hack working, and then we can sort of make it nicer. It would be great. I'm playing with CoreDNS right now, which we merged the PR for that, and so CoreDNS is now opt-in, and as it is in Kubernetes. But I would like to get that. I expect there will be more revisions of CoreDNS. It's new code. We expect lots of versions of it, and I would love to not have to do Kops revisions whenever that happens. So watch for a PR, and I will CC you on that, Andrew. Thank you.
Awesome.
Peter, existing IAM roles. Existing IAM roles.
Yeah, everyone's favorite.
Yes.
So I went through your comments, and I noticed with the exist and warn if changes life cycle that it's not failing if it doesn't exist.
Okay. So for people that don't know, this is the idea of using, so Kops currently creates IAM objects, and in particular IAM roles, and a lot of people in enterprise type scenarios want to pre-create them or create them a little differently. We want to make that possible and easy, but we don't necessarily want to give up. We don't want it to be completely like you can do whatever you want and we won't even mention it if it's wrong. And so we have this lifecycle mode called lifecycle exists and warn if changes, which will check that should check that the IAM role objects that you are specifying do exist. And if they are not exactly as we expect, it will be a warning. We have a different mode where it is a error if the things are not exactly as you expect. So this is it should be in my opinion, a good UX in that it will enable you to make the change, and it will enable you to create your own IAM objects, and it will do some validation, and it will give you a warning but not an error if they aren't quite right, which, I don't know, seems like a good compromise to me. I think Peter, you're saying that if it doesn't exist, it's not a error, and it should be an error. So
Yes.
we should fix that. But
I think the problem. I think the problem might be the way that the life cycles are working, Justin. Because if you remember, we assumed that, I forget the exact life cycle name. We assumed that we could run one of the life cycles and it would just check to see if something exists, and it wouldn't fail. And the life cycle is checking to see if it exists, and it will continue to check to see if it exists, and it doesn't like gracefully say, no, it doesn't exist and goes away. It just loops and or fails. So I think this is a problem in our life cycles that we're using the wrong, when we set the life cycle to a specific warning, it's the wrong one. If that makes sense.
Okay. I mean, let's not let this hold up the
PR.
Your IAM PR. It would be great, obviously, to have it working, but
God, it would be awesome to have that code merged.
Yeah, is there a separate issue for this issue? Oh, yeah, is there a separate issue for exists and warn if changes lifecycle not working?
I have not opened one. I have not checked if there.
I opened one a long time ago, Justin. If it's still open.
Okay, but we can fix that. That should not be a terribly difficult fix, actually. Wow, we tore through the agenda. Is there anything else anyone wants to talk about?
I actually do have one thing, if there's nothing else.
Go for it.
What would it take to create a cluster using a Route 53 hosted zone in a different account?
Changes with the cloud provider comes to mind.
I'm debating using the .k8.local to not create any Route 53 resources, but then I'm wondering about the API server cert.
So the API server cert will always be.
It's fine.
Yeah, it will always be like a.
It's IAM permissions, isn't it, Justin?
So let's go through this one at a time. The API server cert will actually, for k8.local, will be the load balancer's name. So that shouldn't really matter. That's an AWS name, and it's a sort of self-signed cert. There is a way to specify a hosted zone ID. I think that's global. So I think if you specify the hosted zone ID correctly of the other hosted zone, it might just work as long as you had permissions in both directions, or permissions both for the account you're running under when you do Kops update cluster, and for the IAM role that you're running under.
I could give permissions to that hosted zone ID in the account the cluster lives in, but I'm not sure how you would specify in the account the zone lives in that this other account can modify this zone.
Right.
Yeah, that I don't. But what may be an easier trick is you can create a hosted zone in your account, a sub-hosted zone in your own account, and delegate from the parent to the child, as it were. So if your parent was example.com, you could have other account.example.com, and you would set up NS records for other account.example.com in example.com, and then you would create your cluster as cluster.otheraccount.example.com. So that is a slightly, I guess it depends what the motivation is, right? Because other account could be dev, for example, which might be a more like logical naming scheme. So it can work reasonably. Kates.local is probably going to be easier, but is not as production tested as other approaches.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think if you want to try it, the hosted zone ID should work, except for IAM, and I don't know exactly how to do the cross-account delegation. I mean, it's certainly possible. I believe it to be possible. I just don't know where to put it.
So what if I were to use a lifecycle override? If I were to give the hosted zone ID of the other account and then specify a hosted or a lifecycle override to not create the records because of the IAM permissions.
Yeah,
and then I could make them myself.
Yes, most of the record creation is going to be done by DNS controller. So I think Kops does try to create some sort of placeholder IPs, but they're not important, and I don't think it's a hard error if those creations fail. You certainly could create them yourself. I don't know whether it's going to be worth the effort. I mean, you could also like create a hosted zone in your local account, in your other account, and then Kops would populate it, and then you could mirror those DNS settings, right? Like at least then everyone would be happy, and you'd have a reference source, and the mirroring is something you could write without having to like reinvent DNS population. But I would, if it was me, I would probably do the hosted zone delegation from the parent to the child.
Got it. Yeah, I'll probably go that route.
Cool. Any other topics? Oh, if you haven't seen it, I did a PR very recently, which lets people opt out of, or it's a proof of concept, right? It lets people opt out of networking. So this is similar, egress external, which opts out of configuring routes on a particular subnet. So it won't configure routes, it won't configure route tables, it won't configure internet gateways, it won't configure NAT gateways, it won't configure anything. It's basically saying like, I know what I'm doing. I have a VGW, I have a direct connect, I have a whatever. The idea being that we can still see it in the cluster spec, but we don't necessarily have to go through each one. This was sort of prompted by someone that did a NAT instance PR, which was great. So we now have the ability to specify a NAT gateway or a NAT instance. I think someone was asking whether they could specify a VGW, a VPN gateway, but then they also had a use case for specifying like just direct, or for using direct connect. So in other words, the opt-out mechanism. I am wary that it will cause people to mess up, but we will see, I guess.
We have 99 PRs open.
We have 99 PRs open.
We're starting to look like other projects.
We're doing great. We need to.
I said it out loud.
We'll start to clear some out, but
I need to review PRs this weekend.
Is Kops going to be one of the projects that moves underneath one of the Kubernetes SIGs repo under AWS when all of that reorganization ends up happening, or because it seems like it's multi-cloud?
It is multi-cloud, so it wouldn't really belong under SIG AWS.
Right.
It doesn't. It's already sort of a higher level project than the SIG repositories. So I believe in the current state of play, it stays where it is. That's not to say that the rules don't change again tomorrow. We also talked about, like moving kubectl into a different org, right? Those sort of things. I don't know. That's
what? Oh my god!
Just all these. So, but I mean, I think a lot of ideas are floated, and I think right now we have a sane set of ideas, which is like pull repos into Kubernetes, and we have Kubernetes SIGs, which are more like the old incubator, but with a clearer chain of ownership and responsibility. So a SIG can get one up.
If you don't mind, I might want to ask a follow-up, if that's cool. Which is, I mean, are you? I mean, I think who's in charge of Kops? Is it just SIG AWS, or is it multiple people from? Okay,
we're part of SIG cluster lifecycle.
Ah, got it.
Yeah, technically. And who's in charge of it is the community.
Yeah.
to be frank, we have an owner's file which has multiple members that have PR permissions. So, and different levels of PR rights, PR review rights. So if you go into owners, you'll notice my name, Justin, Andrew Kim, Mike. I think there's 3 owners on the call today. So.
That helps. Thanks. I appreciate it. Sorry, I must have had.
You do not have to apologize. It's a great question.
I made the assumption since like 98% of the docs are examples based on AWS. Like,
well, Andrew was kind enough to add DigitalOcean. How's that going, by the way?
Yeah.
You guys got a bunch of users now?
It's going okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Bugs?
It's just kind of like in the alpha stage. I'm hoping someone will. There has been a couple of issues opened, so I was able to address those, and so just kind of waiting. So like it doesn't support multi-masters yet, which is probably the biggest blocker for pushing for beta or anything, but we'll get there soon.
Yeah, people don't need multiple masters. That's my nitpick. You really need 5 nines.
Multiple masters, yeah.
5 nines on your control plane, that is.
Right.
And DigitalOcean separately launched a hosted product, which for some reason I believe does not use Kops, right? But we'll get there.
Yeah, it doesn't use Kops, but to be fair, I mean, I think Kops has its own use cases that I think is definitely going to be something that our product probably won't support. So,
awesome. Well, congratulations on that launch as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? That was a good question, by the way, Zach. So,
thank you, sir.
Do we get half an hour back today, Justin?
Works for me.
All right. Everybody have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Yeah.